One careless step, one split second behind the camera. That's all it took for ordinary moments to turn into the 5 most disturbing selfie-related tragedies ever recorded. These aren't just bad decisions, they're fatal miscalculations captured just before everything went wrong. It was October 2nd, 2015, along a lightly traveled freight rail corridor in eastern Ohio, where the tracks cut through low woods and shallow embankments outside a small town. Early evening light was fading, leaving long shadows across the rails. The weather was clear and dry, and the steel lines stretched forward before curving sharply out of view, a bend that limited sight distance in one direction to a few hundred feet. The gravel ballast beside the tracks was uneven, made of loose stone designed for drainage, not footing. The surrounding area was quiet, with no nearby homes close enough to hear an approaching train until it was already in view, and no fencing to physically separate pedestrians from the railbed. Evan Mercer was 19 and in his first year of college, supporting himself with part-time work in a general service position while managing a limited weekly budget. Friends characterized him as outgoing and easygoing, someone who naturally stepped forward when groups needed direction. He frequently used his phone to capture outings and small details, positioning himself behind the camera more often than in front of it. He tended to move with confidence and speed, relying on instinct when judging distance and timing. That evening, Evan and a companion were returning to a parked vehicle after a local event. They cut briefly along the rail line as a shortcut, a decision meant to save time that instead placed them within an active rail corridor. Posted warning signs marked the area as restricted, but the tracks were unfenced. Train traffic on the line was frequent but irregular, with long gaps between passes that created a false sense of safety. Evan stepped between the rails to frame a centered photo, positioning himself on the wooden ties while his friends stood farther away, outside the curve. From that position, neither could see far enough downline to detect an approaching train until it cleared the bend. There were no nearby crossings, no active signals, and no witnesses positioned with a clear view in both directions. The phone camera captured Evan standing upright between the rails. The train only became visible once it rounded the curve, emerging suddenly into the frame. The sound of the horn followed almost immediately. Based on event recorder data, the locomotive was traveling at standard freight speed for the corridor. Emergency braking was initiated as soon as the engineer identified the obstruction, but the stopping distance far exceeded the remaining space. Evan attempted to step off the track. His foot slid on the loose ballast and his balance shifted toward the rail. The locomotive struck him at track level. The force caused fatal injuries instantly, leaving no opportunity for further movement or response. The train came to a stop several hundred feet beyond the point of impact, consistent with braking limits at that speed and load. First responders arrived after the engineer radioed the incident. Evan's phone was located beside the railbed, intact despite surface damage. The final image showed him centered between the tracks, taken moments before the collision. The timestamp aligned with the train's event recorder, which documented horn activation, speed, and emergency braking. Investigators also reviewed the rail line's sight distance geometry and confirmed the curve limited advance visibility to a window too short for avoidance once the train appeared. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be catastrophic blunt force trauma. Authorities concluded the death was accidental, caused by unauthorized presence on an active rail line. No charges were filed. After documentation, scene measurements, and equipment checks were completed, rail traffic resumed later that evening under normal operating conditions. Evan Mercer's death demonstrated how quickly speed and distance remove any margin for escape once a train is in motion. In the next case, Logan Hartwell would face a different danger altogether, one involving elevation, structural fatigue, and a rooftop moment where failure came not from movement, but from what was expected to hold steady. It was May 28, 2018, at a short-term rental building on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Nevada, where a rooftop terrace overlooked a quiet residential corridor and a low concrete courtyard below. The night was warm and dry, with steady artificial lighting mounted along the roofline and a light wind moving across the open space. The building had been renovated years earlier, before more recent updates to guardrail standards were widely enforced, and the rooftop was marketed as a casual gathering area rather than a controlled observation deck. No staff were present on the roof, and access was unrestricted to guests using the rental units. The terrace surface consisted of sealed concrete, with furniture arranged several feet back from the perimeter edge. Logan Hartwell, 26, worked in a general office role that involved routine administrative responsibilities and long periods at a desk. He was known among friends for being personable and systematic, often taking charge when trips or group plans were being organized. Logan typically handled logistics, from schedules to location choices. During social events, he gravitated toward taking photos, making minor adjustments to positioning and angle to capture a clean, balanced image. He favored photographs that looked natural and unforced. The trip had been arranged weeks in advance as a birthday celebration, and the rental was chosen for its rooftop view, which he considered a low-key gathering space rather than an area demanding heightened safety awareness. The guardrail surrounding the terrace was mounted directly into the concrete surface using metal anchors installed during an earlier renovation. At the time of installation, the design met local requirements, but maintenance records later showed no follow-up inspections, load testing, or reinforcement. Years of heat expansion, temperature fluctuation, and intermittent exposure to moisture had gradually weakened several anchor points beneath the surface. From above, the railing appeared straight and intact, showing no visible cracks, looseness, or movement during casual contact. As the group gathered near the edge, Logan positioned himself with his back to the railing to widen the frame of a selfie. The phone was held at arm's length and angled downward to include the courtyard lighting below. Others stood several feet away and did not lean on the barrier. There were no posted warnings restricting use of the edge area, and nothing visible suggested the railing could not support moderate pressure applied slowly. Security camera footage later showed Logan shifting his weight backward. Multiple anchor bolts failed nearly at the same moment. Rather than detaching cleanly, the railing folded outward as the anchors sheared from the concrete slab. With no resistance behind him, Logan lost balance and fell backward over the edge. He dropped approximately 5 stories before striking the concrete surface below. The impact caused fatal injuries immediately, leaving no opportunity for movement or assistance. Emergency services were contacted by others on the rooftop. Responders secured the scene and restricted access to the terrace while documentation was completed. Logan's phone was recovered on the rooftop near the collapsed railing section. The final image, saved moments before the fall, showed him centered in the frame with the roof edge visible behind his shoulders. The image timestamp aligned with building camera footage documenting the sequence of structural failure and the fall. A subsequent inspection identified corrosion, metal fatigue, insufficient embedment depth in several anchor bolts, and a lack of redundancy in the railing's mounting system. Investigators determined there was no evidence of deliberate risk-taking beyond ordinary use of the space. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma due to a fall from height. Authorities ruled the incident accidental, citing structural failure as the primary contributing factor and recommending improved inspection standards for similar properties. Logan Hartwell's death demonstrated how routine behavior can turn fatal when unseen structural weaknesses give way without warning. In the next case, the threat would not come from failing hardware or elevation, but from proximity, as Derek Langston moved too close to a captive animal in an environment meant to separate people from danger. It was June 19, 2013, at a small privately operated wildlife park in southern Florida, where open-air enclosures sat beneath direct sun and heat rose steadily from compacted dirt walkways. The weather was clear and humid, with temperatures climbing into the upper 80s by early afternoon. Cicadas and distant animal sounds blended with visitor noise, and shade was limited to scattered awnings and enclosure overhangs. The park relied on modest staffing and aging infrastructure, typical of independent roadside facilities, rather than large regulated attractions. Paths were narrow, and viewing areas were designed for brief stops rather than prolonged crowding. Derek Langston was 34 years old. He worked in a general technical role that kept him indoors most days, focused on routine systems and problem-solving tasks. Family members described him as attentive, calm, and methodical, with a habit of leaning closer to examine details rather than stepping back. He enjoyed documenting trips and family outings, often volunteering to take photos so others could stay engaged. Derek was visiting the park with relatives during a short regional trip and viewed the stop as informal recreation rather than an environment requiring heightened caution. He had no prior experience working around large animals and relied on visible barriers to indicate safe distance. The tiger enclosure consisted of a reinforced primary fence set several feet back from a low secondary barrier. The barrier stood roughly waist-high and was intended to discourage approach rather than physically prevent an adult from leaning over it. The design relied heavily on visitor compliance and passive spacing rather than force. Posted signage advised guests to remain behind the barrier, but did not specify minimum distances or describe animal reach. Inside the enclosure, an adult tiger rested near the fence line in a shaded area. According to staff logs and video review, the animal had been inactive for much of the afternoon and displayed no pacing, stalking, or agitation. As Derek approached the barrier, he raised his phone to capture a closer image. To adjust the framing, he leaned his upper body forward over the secondary barrier, closing the distance between himself and the enclosure fence. This movement brought his head and shoulders into the animal's immediate proximity zone. Several nearby visitors later stated the action appeared brief and unplanned, lasting only moments, and did not appear to involve taunting or repeated movement. The tiger reacted to the sudden encroachment with a single defensive lunge. The movement was rapid and linear, consistent with a startle response rather than pursuit. The animal's jaws clamped onto Derek's exposed neck and upper chest through the fence opening. Major blood vessels were damaged immediately. The tiger released within seconds and retreated several feet back into the enclosure. Derek fell backward outside the barrier, losing consciousness quickly due to severe blood loss and collapse of blood pressure. Park staff initiated emergency procedures while clearing the area and securing the enclosure. Medical responders arrived shortly afterward and confirmed death at the scene. Derek's phone was recovered near the barrier, its screen still active. The final image showed the enclosure fence dominating the frame, with part of the animal visible beyond it. The image timestamp aligned with witness accounts and fixed security footage documenting Derek's forward movement and the animal's brief reaction. A post-incident inspection found the secondary barrier insufficient to prevent close human contact and cited inadequate separation distance for large carnivores. Inspectors also noted the lack of physical deterrence preventing visitors from leaning forward. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be exsanguination from bite trauma. Authorities concluded the incident was accidental, caused by a breach of safe viewing distance rather than aggressive animal behavior. The facility was ordered to suspend operations pending structural changes and safety redesign. Derek Langston's death showed how quickly a controlled environment can fail when physical boundaries are treated as optional rather than absolute. In the next case, the danger shifts away from animals and enclosures as Caleb Rowan steps into a restricted spillway where moving water and slick concrete leave no margin for recovery once balance is lost. It was August 11, 2014, at a small hydroelectric dam in western Pennsylvania, where a narrow river slowed briefly before spilling over a wide concrete slope constructed decades earlier to regulate seasonal water levels. The afternoon was clear and warm, with temperatures in the low 80s and steady sunlight reflecting off pale concrete surfaces. From the top of the structure, the spillway appeared quiet and exposed, marked by dark algae streaks and mineral staining from years of fluctuating flow. Warning signs were posted near access points along the riverbank, but the basin itself remained physically open, separated from foot traffic only by faded paint lines and uneven gravel leading down to the concrete. At 22, Caleb Rowan divided his time between college coursework in a creative discipline and a part-time service job that covered his basic expenses. He kept a low profile, preferring independence over group activity, and approached new places with patience rather than urgency. When he wasn't in class or at work, he spent time walking through remote areas on his own, paying attention to overlooked details in the built and natural landscape. He used his phone less as a social tool and more as a way to record surfaces, structures, and spaces that caught his attention. In those settings, he trusted what he could see in front of him, often treating industrial environments as fixed backdrops instead of systems that could change without warning. The dam operated through automated release cycles managed remotely rather than by on-site staff. When activated, water volume could increase without audible alarms or direct warning to anyone nearby. The spillway basin sloped gradually toward a culvert intake embedded in the concrete wall at its lower end. Algae coated much of the surface near the waterline, forming a slick layer that reduced traction even when water levels were low. Despite signage warning of sudden releases, there were no physical barriers preventing entry into the basin. Caleb stepped into the spillway basin to photograph reflections forming across the concrete surface. His phone captured the shallow water around his boots and the stillness of the exposed slope ahead. As he repositioned slightly to widen the frame, the automated release cycle began upstream. Water spread across the basin in a widening sheet, moving steadily downhill. The flow increased gradually at first, then with enough force to press against his legs and alter footing. The algae-coated surface became increasingly unstable as depth rose from ankle height toward his lower legs. As the current strengthened, Caleb lost footing and fell sideways. The moving water carried him downslope toward the intake opening. During the fall, he struck the concrete surface, sustaining blunt injuries that limited his ability to stand or regain balance. The force of the water pushed him against the intake, where the flow pinned him in place. With water continuing to move through the system, he was unable to pull free. Once pinned, the conditions left no practical means of escape. When Caleb failed to return from his hike, concern was raised and a search was initiated. After water levels were reduced as part of standard operations, responders located his body downstream from the spillway. His phone was recovered farther along the riverbank, lodged against debris and partially submerged. The final image showed water overtaking the basin floor, with the concrete slope dominating the frame and no other people visible. The image timestamp aligned with dam operation logs, documenting the automated release cycle. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be drowning, with blunt force trauma as a contributing factor. Investigators confirmed there was no mechanical malfunction and that the dam operated as designed throughout the release. Authorities concluded the death was accidental, resulting from entry into an active spillway basin during an automated release. Recommendations emphasized the need for physical access restrictions and clearer separation between public areas and operational zones. Caleb Rowan's death showed how engineered systems can appear dormant and harmless until motion begins, leaving no margin for recovery once conditions change. In the next case, the danger will come not from water or machinery, but from depth and visibility, as Mason Kepler enters an unfinished structure where a single step carries consequences long before risk becomes obvious. It was January 22, 2016, when emergency responders were dispatched to an unfinished residential tower on the edge of a developing urban district in Texas. The structure rose several stories above surrounding lots, its concrete frame exposed and unlit after work hours. Exterior lighting illuminated only parts of the perimeter, leaving large sections in shadow. Temporary fencing surrounded the site, but multiple access points remained open where crews moved materials during the day. Inside, the building was dark, with light entering only through open window bays, stairwells, and elevator openings that cut vertically through the structure. The absence of interior lighting made depth and distance difficult to judge even at close range, especially along interior corridors. Mason Kepler was 20, and made his living through irregular shifts in a general labor job. He was known among friends for high energy and a tendency to act on impulse, particularly in places he felt comfortable. Unfinished and abandoned buildings attracted his attention, and he treated them as unused shells rather than environments with ongoing risks. Mason judged danger almost entirely by what was visible in front of him and had no background in construction or industrial safety. On the night of the incident, he entered the structure with others after work hours, assuming it was effectively dormant rather than an active site with incomplete protective measures. The interior of the structure was in a transitional phase. Permanent lighting had not been installed, and electrical wiring remained exposed in several areas. Floors were bare concrete, coated with fine dust and scattered debris that muted depth perception near edges. Safety systems were temporary. Elevator shafts ran vertically through the center of the building, open on multiple floors to allow ongoing work. Some openings were marked with plastic tape or warning signage, but others had been left unguarded after barriers were moved earlier in the day and not replaced, creating inconsistent visual cues throughout the floor and increasing the chance of misjudgment. Mason moved through the interior using his phone as a light source, scanning hallways and open rooms. Near the elevator bank, the open shaft blended into the surrounding darkness, its depth difficult to judge without direct light. The floor edge lacked a solid guardrail or cover, creating a visual boundary that was easy to miss from certain angles. He shifted his stance while holding the phone outward inside the structure. His heel crossed the slab edge. There was no interruption in the fall. Mason dropped approximately 8 stories through the open shaft, striking the concrete base below. The injuries were immediately fatal. No one inside the building witnessed the fall directly. Others nearby heard the impact echo through the shaft and contacted emergency services. Responders secured the site and located Mason at the bottom of the shaft. His phone was found on the floor, above near the opening, its screen damaged but still powered on. The last image showed a dim corridor with unfinished walls, exposed concrete, and the edge of the shaft just outside the frame. The image timestamp aligned with call records placed shortly after the sound was reported, confirming the narrow window between the fall and the emergency call. A subsequent investigation found the shaft had been left unguarded after work hours, with only minimal visual markers indicating the hazard. Inspectors noted that while warning signs were posted elsewhere on the site, physical barriers were insufficient to prevent accidental entry into vertical openings, particularly under low-light conditions common after sunset. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be catastrophic blunt force trauma resulting from a fall. Authorities ruled the incident accidental, citing unauthorized entry combined with inadequate temporary safeguards and recommending improved overnight barrier controls. Mason Kepler's death showed how unfinished spaces can become lethal when darkness, depth, and missing barriers intersect. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.